Did Alice Cooper sell out in 1989 with the release of his album Thrash? That's what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a little bit of a backstory on the events leading up to the album and the reasons why I thought it wasn't a good idea, but how he made it work to become the comeback album of his career. The album was released on July 25th, 1989. It is celebrating 35 years. The album features the top 10 hit Poison, which was his first top 10 since 1977, with the song You and Me. This also showed a significant shift in his musical style, where he went from a traditional heavy metal sound to what I will call hair metal that was popular at that time. Alice Cooper has had a long career. He released his first album with the Alice Cooper Band in 1969, but I'm not going to start my story back then. I'm going to start my story in 1980 when he released a series of albums that he refers to now as the Blackout albums. They were Flush the Fashion, Special Forces, Zipper Catches Skin, and Dada. At that time, Alice Cooper had a very bad alcohol problem, and he was becoming addicted to cocaine. Things took a turn for the worst in the middle of 1983 when he was hospitalized for cirrhosis of the liver. He also almost divorced his wife Cheryl Cooper around that same time, but they decided to stay together. This was a turning point for Alice Cooper, so he decided to become sober. It was also around this time that he turned to Christianity and said it was God who helped him overcome his demons. In the mid-80s, he kept busy collaborating with other artists. One of them was Joe Perry of Aerosmith, which will be important later on in the story. He was now ready to get his musical career back on track when he met this guitarist named Kane Roberts. Now, if you've ever seen this guy, he looks like he should have been in an action movie. The guy looks like Rambo. He released his next album called Constrictor in 1986, which featured a song that was in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, called He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask. Constrictor was probably his real comeback album, being that he was newly sober, but later I'll explain how Thrash was also somewhat of a comeback. A year later, he released an album called Raise Your Fist and Yell, and this was another traditional heavy metal album, possibly even a little heavier than Constrictor. This album features Kane Roberts and also features Kip Winger, who would go on to form the band Winger about a year after this. Alice Cooper also had a small acting role in the John Carpenter horror movie called The Prince of Darkness. Now, what does all this have to do with Thrash? Well, as I just said, the two previous albums were meant to be a comeback, but they were only moderately successful. His contract with MCA Records also expired, so he was left without a label. But he was determined to make a comeback, so he approached executives at Epic Records and was given another contract. He wanted to get back that success he had from back in the 70s, so he decided he had to follow the trends and put out a glam metal album. So now, in my personal opinion, I think the success of Thrash was a combination of luck, putting out the right album at the right time, having the right lead single, and working with the right people. So let's talk more about that. First, let's discuss some of the challenges he had to overcome in breaking into this new subgenre of metal. First of all, Alice Cooper was born in 1948, which means in 1989, he was 41 years old, which seems very old to be breaking into the glam metal scene because, as you know, it was filled with bands with a bunch of guys who were in their 20s who loved to party and get girls and get drunk and all that and hang out on the LA Sunset Strip. I'm talking about bands like Poison and Motley Crue. And here's this 41-year-old rocker who doesn't have the appearance of someone in a typical glam metal band. He's sober, he doesn't party, he's a married man, but still he's trying to break into the glam metal scene. So I think that was the first challenge. Secondly, he has a different style. It's more shock rock, and he's always had those controversial lyrics in the past. I'm talking about songs like Dead Babies and I Love the Dead and that type of shock rock. But glam metal is all about love and relationships and parties and girls, so it doesn't seem like it was fitting for his persona. Another thing is his voice. He has this raspy vocal style which didn't seem to fit the subgenre. And here's a big one. Metalheads are usually not forgiving of artists when they change their sound, so he was taking a big risk in alienating all the fans he had from the two previous albums, Constrictor and Raise Your Fist and Yell, as well as the horror movie fans of Prince of Darkness, and the other horror movie that I didn't mention before called Monster Dog. But yet, he pulled it off, and this was one of his best-selling albums of all time. I think he had one advantage was that he was well-known in the industry, so he had a lot of good connections. Remember how I mentioned he did some work with Joe Perry of Aerosmith? He was able to get the entire band of Aerosmith to collaborate on this album, and he also got Bon Jovi to help him out as well. He also landed some well-known songwriters such as Joan Jett and Diane Warren. And as a producer, he got Desmond Childs. Now, this guy was a hit maker. He was the man behind Kiss, I Was Made for Loving You, Joan Jett, I Hate Myself for Loving You, and many of Bon Jovi's biggest hits of the 80s, such as You Give Love a Bad Name and Living on a Prayer. And this brings us to the first single, Poison. I remember this when it came out. I think it was actually the song that got me into Alice Cooper, because after I heard it, I went out and bought the Thrash album, and this is the CD, my original one. And then I bought a bunch of other albums after that. This song peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, and this was back when these metal bands were having hit singles. Another factor that allowed him to release such a successful glam metal album was the fact that he wrote some pretty good power ballads, and back then, the power ballad was the key to success in terms of mainstream acceptance. The main power ballad on the album was Only My Heart Talkin', which features Steven Tyler on vocals, but surprisingly, the single didn't do that well. It only peaked at 89, but was fairly popular. Then there was the song House of Fire, which was originally recorded by Bon Jovi as a demo, and I think that resurfaced on one of his albums, but it was another single that didn't do well, but was pretty popular due to the fact that it was co-written by Joan Jett. I think another factor in how he was able to pull off this transition into glam metal was that there was still this horror or shock component to some of the songs, such as Bed of Nails or This Maniac's in Love with You. In other words, he didn't completely abandon the Alice Cooper persona. Now, I mentioned before how metal fans are not very forgiving when their favorite artists change their sound, but I think for some reason, Alice Cooper was always given a pass, because he pretty much is a chameleon in terms of the music industry. He has reinvented himself so many times over the past 50 years, so I think for that reason, he knows what he's doing. He knows he can adapt his sound to whatever is popular, but without losing the Alice Cooper persona. Because before this album, he did new wave in the early 80s, he did soft rock ballads in the late 70s, he did shock rock in the early 70s, and he did psychedelic rock in the late 60s. So he was known to change his style, and he's one of the few artists who gets a pass every time he does it. And that brings us to the answer of the question I posed at the beginning of the video. Did he sell out? I would say no, because he was able to keep his Alice Cooper persona, but adapt his music to what was popular at the time. I think for me, this is one of my favorite albums, but probably more for nostalgic reasons, just because it was one of the first albums I ever bought from him. I was getting into metal. I was 18 years old, and I can understand that people would rank it low in his discography, because he released another album after this called Hey Stupid. That was the same type of style. After that, he released The Last Temptation, which was more of a return to form. I also did a review to that. So with that being said, I'm going to link those two videos right here. And thanks for watching. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.